Welcome to Faith Over Breakfast. You are listening to a podcast by Pastor Eric Deepen and Pastor Andy Littleton. If you enjoy Faith Over Breakfast, we encourage you to rate it on the Apple Podcast app, on Spotify, or Google Play. Thank you and enjoy the podcast.
Welcome to Faith Over Breakfast. My name is Andy Littleton from Mission Church in Tucson, Arizona. I'm sitting across from Eric Deepen from the Village here in Tucson as well. We have cups of coffee. I have had breakfast. Eric has not, which makes me think I should have brought you some. But Here we are at the Faith Over Breakfast table discussing the Ukraine conflict.
Yeah.
So
why didn't you bring me breakfast?
Well, I didn't know if you were into the little parfait I had.
Probably not.
Yeah, see, you didn't want it.
No.
Anyway, not a lighthearted topic
Not
per
at
se, of course, and we, disclaimer, are not going to, you will not walk away from this podcast knowing exactly what the United States should do, or all of the most up-to-date news as of when you are listening to this on Ukraine. But we hope that you, as a Christian or somebody considering the Christian perspective, would find this to be helpful.
You know what?
Nope.
I think somebody did give us a tip.
Oh.
They did.
Oh, we got a tip.
We did. I was wondering why that came in, and now it just hit me. Thank you, listener.
Oh, okay. Look at that.
Thank you personally later.
Which means Eric's going to fix our microphones.
Yes.
Anyway.
We're going to get rubber bands and fixes for this is great.
What a day. But
yay. That makes so much sense now.
Enjoy the podcast knowing that we are enjoying our tip.
Yes. And get more tips means more studio, more, better, maybe guests. Maybe we'll even have some interviews. Maybe we'll move to YouTube.
Eric, you've co-opted this intro.
I love it.
You're making like a money grab, and I'm a little uncomfortable with it. So we're going to have to start the podcast right now.
I love you, Andy. We got PETA.
Hey, Eric.
Hey, it's good to see you.
Good to see you too. We're
drinking coffee.
We have coffee, so that's good. Did you partake in some breakfast just a bit ago? No,
I did not. I worked out, and then I quick went to a meeting, and that meeting ran a little late, and then here I am.
Oh, so you've had a day already. I have I had a yogurt parfait, and here I am. A little bit behind.
That's all right.
With no good excuse, no meeting, no workout.
That's all right.
Yeah, thanks. So, Ukraine. Yeah, and Russia and the world and all of that.
Dude, I feel like we should have like some music that signifies like, a news announcement. I don't know how that music works, but you know what I'm talking about.
I do.
Here reporting on Russia, Andy Littleton.
Yeah,
on the ground.
Except I feel like I should say this is a good moment to remind everyone what our podcast is and is not. This is two pastors sitting down to a breakfast table type conversation. You're invited to join us. So we're thinking about this as pastors of small churches in light of this stuff. So, of course, we are not foreign correspondents. We do not have all the most up-to-date information necessarily. By the time this comes out, we'll be even further behind.
Yeah, definitely.
And we aren't strategists. We don't know what the world or our country should do. And we're not necessarily coming here with the Bible answer prepared as to what we should think necessarily. We have more thoughts potentially in that direction. But I just want to talk to you about how this is getting discussed in the village, how people are feeling in your family, in your circles, stuff like that. What are you thinking we need to do to pastor through this? Maybe that's
a good. Wow, that's a lot of questions. One of our avid listeners told me recently, is everything okay?
Oh, I don't know. I might need to be turned up slightly.
Yeah, look at that. Let's try that.
There we go. That's good. Back to it.
Back to it.
One of our avid listeners
said that we do better when we have a direct question that's focused.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure that's true. Well, so I'm trying to provide the 20 direct questions is what I'm doing. But yeah, I still, yeah. So let's start with this. What's the sense that you're hearing?
Well, I mean, our community after the morning service anyway, I'd say about 15 people got together and prayed for Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a definite, people have, individuals connected either as missionaries or as, there are Russian nationals in their family or, So there's some connections to things.
Just really quick on that, really quick. So I read David French's weekly newsletter that he sends out, and one thing that he brought up in there had to do with the fact that the Christian church in America has a way bigger connection to Ukraine than a lot of other places, just because after previous conflicts, fall of the Soviet Union, stuff like that. A lot of Christian missionaries went in there. A lot of people have adopted children from Ukraine, and I've seen evidence of that in our close circles, church circles, and fellow church circles here.
Yes,
that there's just a lot of specific connection to Ukraine in the American Christian church.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So that's an interesting, David French was saying that that's not really being discussed or covered as people are thinking about how, the right and left feel about the potential conflict. He was saying this is a major factor, actually.
Yes.
So, sorry. Back. So people in your community, you're seeing that too.
Yeah. I mean, I think the problem with Ukraine in general is that, I mean, you and I were not talking about Ukraine.
No.
I don't know. Certainly 6 months ago, I didn't say the word Ukraine, except maybe to say that, my family was Ukrainian if somebody asked where we came from. Yeah. Or at least my father's side.
Yeah.
So no, we haven't been talking about it. I think if you are a historian, you understand that, for instance, in World War II, the reason that Hitler pushed towards Russia was Ukraine is the breadbasket. It is the place of wealth and
a lot of resources.
A lot of resources, and so
it's like Settlers of Catan.
It is Settlers of Catan. That's where he was headed. Like Poland was those were all distractions. Yeah, he wanted Ukraine, and he wanted to hold on to Ukraine, and he wanted it to be a colony, basically, of Germany. So I think Ukraine is always been in a unique space in history, all the way back to the Greeks. So this is maybe a world history lesson for all of us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think what I hear a lot, let's just talk about what we hear a lot, is people don't understand what Putin is thinking. Why would he do this? Yeah. Why is he? And so there's a lot of psychoanalysis of Putin and what's in Putin's head, and then there's a lot of talk about about the oligarchs, and there's a lot of talk about them, all the money in Russia and in those particular places, and the wealth disparity, and what is Putin doing, and why would Putin do this? And so there's a lot of theories about that, but people are mostly just, and I think in my church, wondering why would Putin do this?
Yeah. It's interesting. I do enjoy history, but the history of the era that we're discussing here is not my department. But John Simon at our church sent around a video of a guy that was doing some explanation on the conflict, and he had a couple of, it seemed pretty thought out, seemed pretty well done. And he had a few layers that he was saying were pretty key. Number one had to do with things like Russia's actually seen a downturn in population and younger population. And so there's a certain sense that he said can't be ignored, that if they have an opportunity for making a big move or something, it feels like it needs to come sooner than later. Then another thing had to do with the resources, especially some new discoveries of things like natural gas resources available off of the coast of Ukraine that would make it extremely valuable. And then there's the whole the pipelines going through, and then Crimea. And I did sort of get concerned back when Russia was hosting the Olympics, and there was that whole Crimea thing.
Yes,
but then Ukraine closed off a major aqueduct to Crimea that's made it almost unlivable. So there's tension around that. Then the other thing had to do with, so that there was the resources, but the other had to do with the Russian, or maybe you could say the primary Russian sense about NATO and its hostility toward them is how they've framed it. And might really truly feel that way, that this is a group of nations that have it out for them, who would strike if they could, and they would gain very strategic, tactical advantages by owning part of Ukraine or being in control of part of Ukraine if there were ever a future conflict with NATO that they seem pretty convinced could be possible. So he laid out some of these things and said, so then when you see it that way, it's like, this is about safety and protecting us in the future. This is about resources that truly belong to us that have been taken from us. Right. And so actually watching that video, the concerning thing to me was I thought, even just watching this video, I can understand why something like this would happen. Putin has said to our leaders that we don't have moral high ground over him because we do and have done the same things, which is true to some degree. And so I could especially see if I were a person in Russia hearing this version of the tale, could I be convinced? Probably. I mean, that this is defensive. Yeah.
Right. So I think that those are all good reasons. Yeah. I don't think there are actually any of the reasons that Putin is invading as primary. And here's why I think that is.
Eric Siepin is in the mind of Vladimir.
I am the mind of Vladimir.
I am not, yeah.
Well, no, I think so. What we do, it's because we're Westerners. Yeah. We analyze Putin and what the Russians are doing from a Western perspective. Sure. And those are all good Western reasons to do it.
It's a good point.
But what I think is happening is that there's a couple issues going on. One is that as Americans, we believe that capitalism will solve all the problems, right? And what we're seeing in this world is that capitalism does not solve all the problems, and it's not fixing everything. What Europe itself thinks is that this amazing unity called the European Union, and this thing that they've done is going to solve all the problems, right? And it hasn't solved all the problems, because what's happening in the rest of the world is not what's happening in our world, because they have a different value system. And I don't think we usually think about values, right? We think of when we're analyzing things. But Putin values different things than we value, which then makes his motivation different.
Right.
Certainly, there are some tactical issues and all that kind of stuff. But we think, well, we're going to put sanctions on Putin and we're going to do all this stuff. But you got to remember that he has $100 billion. Right. He's disconnected from his people, and that his people struggle, and sanctions.
He'll probably let them suffer.
Yes.
Pretty much no doubt.
Right. And yes, certainly has he asked China for things? Yes. But Putin sees Ukraine as Russia. And he has, he wrote a 7,000 word essay on this, and he sees himself as a liberator, liberating Russians in Ukraine. Right. And it's done through language, right? They all speak Russian. And so we went to liberate them. But he also sees himself as all four of the great, warriors of the past and the czars, and going back all the way to the Viking who first was converted, called Vladimir. Here we get all of this. So he's approaching things So actually, I don't think Putin cares if Ukraine is flattened or not.
Right.
And he does not actually care if he's successful. And he said so much as he cares how he's remembered in history.
Right.
And he wants to be remembered as someone who unifies Russia. The problem with it is Stalin, by the way, not Russian.
Right.
Russia, until 1991, has never been Russia.
Right.
Russia trying to figure out how to be a country, 91 and up, it's been really, really hard.
Yeah.
And difficult. And so Russia is now then, we can't define, because internally, like, so if you think about the United States, we can do things bureaucratically, right? We can say, well, the problem with the U.S. is that we don't have the right tax code, or the problem is that we don't have the right moral laws, or we don't have this. So internally, we can work things out. In Russia, you can't say any of those things. So the best way to say the problem is that we aren't unified. We aren't a country. Right. We're not. So it's always outward, because all the money, there's no bureaucracy, because the oligarchy owns everything. Like, they own it all.
Yeah.
And they control it all. So there's no way to say, oh, well, we need to tax these people more, or we need to spread the wealth out, or we need to have more economic programs. No, that doesn't exist. Right. So we need to invade. We need to have Mother Russia be a country, and all back together. And so I think he has a whole different value system.
Yeah, for sure.
And that means that what's important to him is not important to us.
Right.
Which I think, if we just pushed aside Ukraine and Russia and thought about it, that's what's the problem even in our own country when we wrestle with one another, is that we don't realize that we are operating from different values.
Yep.
And that is a big part of what's happening here. And I think if we shift and say, okay, well, this is what he values, and yes, his arguments may be poor.
Sure.
And it may not be the right thing, but it's a different value system, and he's operating on a different right and wrong.
Yeah. And we as a nation should have definitely learned this in dealing with, Taliban and such, is that similar idea. Like, we are not dealing with people who operate under the same motives, and that's just being part of the world. Yeah.
So, and there's another thing here, just to get, I'm not a great philosopher, but I don't remember the name of the philosopher that Putin he has books. Like, he follows philosophers.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, he's a smart guy.
But he's not operating. So the particular philosophy he's operating from is that God has left the world undone and a mess. And it is actually Mother Russia's job to create turmoil to then bring a unification together, right? And I think it's not let's get into the thought processes of the people that we're invading or the brokenness in the world. It's, we are going to solve this, and we have the right thing, and here it is. We're going to solve the problem. And I think, so there's just those clashes of philosophical ideas.
No doubt.
That is not how we think about it.
And religious. And that's, within the...
Sure.
There's been a little talk about the Orthodox Church, and, clearly not the whole Orthodox Church is on board, but some is, and how that factors in. And it's not, I guess, if you were to not read the Bible as an entire story arc, which a lot of people don't even here, you could see how you could justify or even see this as a valid method. I read a little bit of the Book of Judges today and was like, I could see a sermon out of this.
Sure.
Vindicating in someone's mind the way that this is going down.
Well, and I think, because of the, what is it, 1,000 years or 700 years earlier, the Ukrainian and Russian church coming together and being connected, and the baptism of Vlad, like that, all that now they're playing a dance with the state, and they have been for a very long time, for survival.
Yeah. And
that is part of what's going on too, in that is that your faith is dancing with survival.
Yeah. And
the state has the power. So there's those issues. So the real question then, Andy, is Podunk, Tucson American.
Yep.
Going to the village, I'm sorry I called you podunk, guys. No, just average, normal human beings going to church. Okay, exceptional.
Podunk, is that like when a poor guy is really good at basketball?
Yes.
Okay.
Poke and dunk.
I'm into it.
Anyway,
I might be
sorry guys,
but I can
just
dunk.
what is and we go off track. What's our response? Like what is it? What actually is Jesus inviting us into and caring for what's happening in the world? Because this event could feasibly pull the world into a third world war.
That is possible.
And so where and what are we called to do?
Right. Yeah.
Or where are we called to go? What are we called to do?
Yeah. Still working on that. Yeah, I think that at this time, so I'm not hearing, I'm sure there are a lot of conversations in our church. I have not been sitting in the middle of them personally. I've shared some tidbits from the front at church, in prayer and little allusions to it. But I haven't really sat with people having that conversation yet. I've talked to my family more. I know that within my family there are a couple thoughts. My daughter said something, and actually I remember when I was a kid hearing about, it was probably the Iraq War, and thinking to myself, in Tucson, we've got this big Air Force base. I wonder if somebody would want to come after that,
Right.
And she expressed something to that effect of like, don't we have all these airplanes and here just down the road,
Some missiles.
Yeah. And like, what does that mean if there's war in the world? And so I think that that's a big thing on my kid's mind, or at least it's there, it shows up. And then the other thing I think in my house would be, my wife and I have had the discussion of like, so why isn't America doing anything? Or, and then talking about, but sanctions, that's not much. But then, kind of going back and forth on, but you don't want to escalate. There's some point where we have to trust that there's some military strategists, and I'm sure they're not perfect, but they know a lot more than I do about what you might consider. And at some point we have to like leave it ultimately in God's hands here, but even more, we have to put some trust. And this gets into the whole like trust of institutions thing that we are very disinclined toward, but we do have to put some trust that some of the people involved here are trained and know what to do and have a better idea generally than we do.
Right.
And that's tough, because I think in our day, that's a very scary thing to do, to say I trust. But then again, I mean, what would I know? What could I even do? Right. Yeah.
Right. If you were trying to do some kind of political action, like, or
what?
Right.
I'm a blip.
Sure.
What am I going to call Vladimir Putin and say, hey, guess what? I have a new 8-hour position with a mission agency, and I'm a pastor of a small church, and I'm going to tell you what, you better cut it out, buddy, or else.
Right.
I'm going to throw my flannel at you.
Right.
Yeah.
You have a dangerous flannel.
Well, I have a wide array.
So it's your weapon. Yeah, and we are supplying military aid in the form of weapons, and just defensive weapons. Our policy is we will give you defensive weapons, not offensive weapons.
Right.
So, yeah, and I think it's a game that we play, but the conversation hasn't been a huge one for you in Mission Church.
Well, I'm just saying I haven't been sitting in the direct conversations so far.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think there is a question. I mean, I've had a lot of around the table conversations at our house and with people over, and there's been a number of conversations that I've sat in at church where people are talking about it. I think there's an agony over war and over the violence and over the death that it's causing, and what it might mean for the world. And just, I think, there are things happening, violence happening all over the world. this is just one that draws all of us in, you know.
Well, yeah, there's a couple factors. Like this is a part of the world that is affluent, and so there's a couple things about that. Number one, we're getting a lot of real-time video information, TikTok, just there's that.
Yeah.
Whereas in certain parts of the world, you get less of that.
Yeah, no, I agree.
But it's still. But then the other factor, I would say, I think in America, and you can tell me if I'm wrong on this, but this is a guess. But when we see it happening to Ukrainians, they look a lot like us, they act a lot like us, and as Americans, I think that feels more engaging, scary than when we see it happening to people who do not look like us or act like us. You think there's anything to that?
I think there's a little bit. I think you're right. I mean, we can identify, but honestly, I think what's happened more than anything is what we can see is this is the 5th largest economy in the world. And though that's actually not that big because the others dominate, what we're learning is that if the 5th largest economy wants to cause some problems in the world, they can do that. And that's the one weapon that Putin has. And so I think it draws people in from South America, and it draws people in from North America and then Africa. And I mean, all over. We're all impacted by the 5th largest economy, and they can shake things up for us.
And they have the most nuclear weapons.
Right. And they can undermine, yes, they're a mid-world power, and they can actually undermine the world economy. And that's what I think Putin, we want where he's headed. It's not so much to take Ukraine, it's to point out that he can undermine everything, and that he and Russia should be taken seriously.
Yeah.
And I think that, and given what they want.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's part of it. And so we're all caught up in that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, from the easiest way to look at it is, outside of people that we know are being impacted, our gas is going up, our food costs are going up, right, which then it impacts people in our communities who don't have the same financial means. All of a sudden, basic things are costing more money.
Right.
We're already all coming out of COVID, so there's an inflation issue.
Yep. And I'm sure Putin's aware of some of those factors and how that works. And
I think he's very aware.
Yeah. Yep. And not only that, but politically, we have been in major upheaval. The president we have was barely, elected. We're polarized, and our previous president, tends toward praise of Putin, which I think that also is a factor in how we feel, because we sense like this isn't just over there. It feels very like, is that happening here?
Sure.
Is that how much reach, how much influence does that have here, and even in our next election?
Yeah,
so right. So
right.
it's
totally.
Yeah, it feels very much connected to our current political reality.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. So, I mean, to go back to the question of, what do we do? Your first answer to that was, well, as an individual, my impact, if I'm looking to impact it, probably not a huge impact.
Sure.
Just as in a political action or where I put my money or anything like that. But as a follower of Jesus,
right,
and as a community of followers of Jesus, what do we do? What are we called into in this? I think this challenges how we understand people. Because, like it or not, Putin is an image bearer of God.
Yeah.
And, we think we can, but God's judgment is on Putin, or God's judgment is on Hitler. They're still image bearers.
Mm-hmm.
They're still people that God died for. Jesus paid a price for, right? He died.
Right.
They're people. And I think that is the first thing we're called to, is that this is all these people on either side are image bearers, obviously broken image bearers, playing out the curse of sin.
Right.
And as followers of Jesus, we bring the kingdom, but the kingdom, its violent action is not with people.
Right.
Its violent action is against the prince and principalities. So what is the enemy about in this process? And then how do we love, care for, and engage image bearers?
Just this is not quite the answer, but it I think alludes toward it. Some of the interesting stories that have come out of this conflict have been, some of the more powerful stories have been of Ukrainians, feeding Russians, or the hotline that was created to help Russians find their loved ones, which has a dual purpose.
Sure.
But still, it's there. Some of the most powerful stories have been seen that certain Ukrainians have refused to treat Russians as if they're not human, and even to just say like they are susceptible to being overtaken by a lie, and
Sure.
we're going to treat them as human, and that speaks something pretty powerful about what you're saying. So I think there's a calling to us all to pray for them this way.
Yeah.
Consider them this way. Think about our enemies, how easily we could be an enemy to someone else. We have been recently. And so I think that's a huge piece. And yeah, and looking for those opportunities to bring the kingdom, not just through counter dominance. Yeah.
Well, I think it goes back to last week's podcast, and that lament is a thing that we do not just for our own space, but we're lamenting the brokenness of the world, and we're not saying, God, why are you doing this, and why are you messing up everything? Why are you making my gas prices go up?
Right.
It's you're a God of mercy and a God of justice and a God of comfort and all comfort and the God of of encouragement in trouble. So based on your character, would you please act? Would you please care for the people who are hurting? Would you can you hear us? This is not good.
Make things right.
And
how do you, really quick, sorry. Our tendency is to be angry at the gas price or the food price.
Oh yeah. We're entitled.
Or the loss of human life, what we see on the news.
Yes.
But I'm a believer in the be angry but do not sin. Anger is valid.
Mm-hmm.
But how often do you think that we're angry when we should lament, and what in the world could we do about that?
Yeah, anger is a hard one because anger is a thing, like just anger, and I guess anger without sin is always, it's supposed to be an anger where injustice is happening,
right? And
we are powerless to bring justice. And that kind of anger should then bring us to lament. I think so that leads us not to try to get what we want by force or to bring consequences. Now, we're told that the state is
given that task.
Yes, and so there's some complexity to that. But for me individually, I can't bring Putin to justice.
Right.
But what I can do is say, this is not right, and people are suffering, and God, you need to do something about this.
Yeah.
You need to intervene. And the beauty of it is I can say you need to, because I know this is his character, and I know he has a plan, and there's a distinct relationship between me and him and his people together that we can say, please do something. Do it. We know you love the people. We know you have mercy.
And
bring justice.
And we know this is not okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then I think we try to act those things out in our local space, and we try to act those things out if God calls us there. And I can see God calling many Americans and others around the world to go to Ukraine, but I don't think if you're a follower of Jesus, God is calling you to pick up a gun and go. He's calling you to go in and care for the Russians, go in and care for the Ukrainians, bring humanitarian aid in a sense, take care of the poor, make sure that the weak, the children have shelter. Yes, if that means defend them because they're being, they're in a camp and people are coming to hurt them. Oh yeah, okay.
I was gonna say, is there a space in your thinking for that?
Yeah. Yeah, I think,
but not necessarily like I'm going to go get them. I'm going to take out as many as I can.
Yeah,
it'd be go to care, and if that care requires defense, then
yes,
do so.
And certainly, I actually think God calls us all to different spaces and understanding how we're to care for people, and so in that way, when it comes to war, and I'm okay with someone saying, no, actually, God called me to strap on my M16 and go down there and defend the Ukrainians.
Yeah,
I think once you choose that road, you choose a road that is very dangerous, and you have to tread lightly,
right?
And how you do those things. But yeah, so I think a lot of it has to do with lament. A lot of it has to do with caring for those who've been impacted by this. And, for me locally, that means actually just people who don't have means are going to be impacted more than those who do. So we have to be extra conscious of our brothers and sisters who, because we live in a capitalist society, there's wealth gaps.
Yeah. And the majority of anger over prices and stuff I've heard is from fairly wealthy people who can absorb that. It would be helpful to think about people who can't, right?
Yeah.
And channel that anger into help somebody instead of just be peeved.
Well, and I think here you want to know what you should do in response to Ukraine. If you're, you should pray for the Ukraine. B, if God invites you to financially support stuff, that's great. But you should look in your community and you should think, who is going to be the most impacted by this? Right. And then you should dedicate yourself to making sure they have a little extra groceries and a little extra money to pay for gas, and commit yourself to that until the end of the war.
At cost to ourselves.
Yeah, at a cost to you.
Yeah.
I think that's how you respond at this point. And try to join the larger church in its lament.
Yeah.
Because
prayer.
Yeah. I think the one thing that's weird about all this is, by the way, the pandemic is over because of Ukraine.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not over.
Right.
But it's over because of Ukraine.
Yeah.
And that's weird to me.
There's a lot of interesting stuff in all that.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
Yeah. I got a little bit something about inconsistency I've just noticed gets me. And so I had probably a lot of people did, but the Kyrie Irving situation, did you hear about this?
I don't know anything about Kyrie Irving.
Okay. So he's anti-vax, and that's interesting. He's always been an interesting dude, and flat earth and lizard people and all kinds of cool stuff. But he's not allowed to play home games for the Nets, the Brooklyn Nets, because he's not vaccinated. So they've lifted all like mask requirements and stuff. Right. So you got a stadium full of people, a lot of them unvaxxed, but he can be there unmasked, but he wasn't allowed to play basketball. And so this is all like, getting in the news and
right.
And that kind of stuff is, so Kevin Durant went on TV and just kind of was like, this is getting stupid. He can be in the room. He can give me a hug, but he can't, come on, at some point this is just getting strange. But there are a lot of, we're in a weird tension. And I think that stuff has people discombobulated.
Yeah, I agree with you.
That doesn't, that we're in the weird transitionary period, but you're absolutely right. I mean, it actually, in a way, like George Floyd and the pandemic, that was an interesting moment to watch.
Right.
Where, and then now, because of Ukraine, it's like that news. It shows us how much of it just has to do with what's top tier in the news.
Right.
That's the big question.
Well, and I just think the hard part of our world is, Black Lives Matter movement, like it or not, the place of the African American in the United States still not that much improved.
Right.
And some people are trying to talk about it, but it's not news. Right. All of a sudden they're okay now. That's done. Okay, so now then it's back to the pandemic and it's back to the whatever variant. Oh, now we have Ukraine. Well, with Ukraine, if let's say it gets settled in the next 6 months and it's not a World War III, okay, so then
the pandemic may be back.
The pandemic may be back, or it's a new moment, and it's hard, and we've talked about this. In some ways, I think you have to decide, like, this one thing is the thing that I'm going to care about and I'm going to focus on, and the others I'll be aware of, but I can't manage this many crises in the world of my brain. And then I got just my own crises in my home, right? The pipes broke, or the dishwasher doesn't clean correctly. There's just the regular many things that we have to face. Or you and I are in an argument, and now I can't think of anything but you. And it's just the way our brains work, and it's a lot of stress.
Has there ever been a day, Eric, where you could only think of me?
No.
Yeah, good. Yes.
That would be a little weird.
Just thought I'd ask, though. Just thought I'd ask.
There have been times when I've spent an hour or two thinking about you.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, that's pretty good. Yeah, I'll take it. I feel special.
I mean, I don't know if it was the whole 2 hours that you occupied all my thinking.
Well, let's hope not.
But you just kept visiting my brain.
Yeah, okay. Interesting. Well, yeah. Well, okay, what about people who are scared? About the conflict. Let's get out of the getting in the head and what should we do? People are just scared.
Yeah, I mean, my son 2 weeks ago asked, am I going to get drafted?
Oh, wow. Yeah.
I mean, I have to sign up for selective service in a year. Like, is this going to be a long war? Like,
right.
So people are afraid.
Did your Vietnam, your dad, was he drafted?
Well, he managed, he just enlisted to avoid that.
My dad was drafted.
So he could make a choice as to what he wanted to do. So I don't remember if he actually got his number and then you have a certain amount of time to go enlist or just take the draft. So I don't remember how that all worked, but yes. So yeah, I mean, we have a professional army, and so yeah, I think worrying like that. I think my daughter, a little concerned about the whole our missiles coming our way kind of thing. Is this are we going to completely just destroy ourselves?
You see these pictures from Ukraine and go, that could happen here, huh?
Yeah. So there's some of that. The uncertainty, right? Mm-hmm. Uncertainty is the issue. We think the world is a certain way, and we have a certain place in it, and then things keep shifting those things, and so then there's an uncertainty there. And I mean, what do you do with uncertainty, Andy? What does a pastor have to offer people with lots of uncertainty?
Yeah. I mean, I'm trying to say, of course, we have a God who is stable, in control. But at the same time, I don't want that to be this card that just gets thrown at people to where it's like, oh, your fears are invalid because of God, And so I think it's more a thing to be just openly shared, prayed about, to receive encouragement from others. I think sometimes we're afraid to admit our uncertainty about any given situation. I had a situation at church where I just admitted that actually in a conversation I was nervous to talk about something because it could get weird, and somebody told me that was very helpful to know. And I was like, oh, really? But just sometimes knowing you're not alone in uncertainty is really huge. I think that's a piece for the Christian community, that we sometimes want to all be okay. There's something about just not being alone in what we're actually experiencing.
Yes.
So those are a few thoughts. I mean, I don't want to minimize that we do have a God that's in control, but I also don't want us to just use that as a way to kind of like a medication to take to try to numb the pain or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't think that's actually helpful. I think that's where you plant your feet as you actually engage with your fears. Yeah,
that's good. This last Sunday, Sue and I preached together, and she was actually addressing some uncertainty things. But what was interesting, her part of the message had to do with an overview of how Jesus met everybody in their uncertainty after they experienced his death in his resurrection. And so how he met Mary, how he met the disciples on the road to Emmaus and in the room, and how he dealt with Thomas and Peter, and how he went after their uncertainty and gave them a stability and an understanding of their actual purpose, and without minimizing the loss that they'd experienced and the trauma that they'd gone through, and the uncertainty that they were thrust into. Because you can actually take a look at, okay, so here are these disciples who followed Jesus, and they said, "You're everything, Jesus. You have the words of life. You're God." And then God gets killed, and it seems that he's not coming back. And he, even Mary, who seems to have a kind of good idea how things are working, when she sees the empty tomb, is like, somebody stole the body. Like, she's not thinking, "Oh yeah, he said he's gonna be resurrected. Yeah, this is good. I'll just need to wait for him to show up." No, and so she's living. So all that uncertainty, I think. You can see that in Ukraine. It's thrust us into not the same kind, but it's like, oh, what's going on? And so I think maybe this is a moment when Jesus is finding us. Maybe a more distinct time for those for the people in Ukraine and Russia, us, to say, hey, to bring some certainty and a reorientation of our mission. Because our mission is not to have, this is a very American thing, but not to have capitalism dominate the entire world and democracy and everything to be new and good. Like, that's not our goal. That's not what God's called us. God's called us to preach Jesus, to bring Jesus, to practice Jesus, both to our local and then all over the world, to bring the true kingdom, which doesn't try to get land, doesn't try to fight each other, that actually unifies around, a risen Savior who changes who we are and what we are, and gives us a new meaning and a promise of a resurrected body. And so I think, wow, maybe this is a moment.
And just to piggyback on that, I would not want to say, oh, everything's okay because God's actually just doing this incredible thing. It's not that, but at the same time, these actually, when you look back on the history of the world and on the history of faith, moments like these are galvanizing. These are times when people look to God and when they begin to doubt the prevailing philosophy. So the people who've been operating under philosophies that are maybe more individualistic, or where there is no God in their thinking, or where it's where everything is moving toward just a general good, or there's no point in meddling in other people's affairs, just be about yourself. Those people are beginning to doubt those philosophies. As Christians, it's a really good time to be anchored and there and present and involved, because God is building a kingdom, and these are key moments. So if your big thing right now is being peeved about gas prices, you might be missing an amazing opportunity.
Well, can I piggyback off one of the things? Because you said, how do you deal with fear? And well, having someone else say, yeah, I'm also there, and really speaking that out. We got to do that together. And I think the computer screen and the phone has an algorithm to develop fear. That is its main thing. It feeds fear because fear gives whoever is the algorithm's owners money, right? That's how that works. And the church dispels fear through Jesus in its gathering together, right? That when you leave your computer screen and your phone screen and you sit together and you worship someone other than yourself, you worship God, and you rest in his stability, and you speak truth to one another and listen, and you speak your fears out loud, is galvanizing, and it thins the veil, and you can see Jesus saying, Andy, right? Eric, follow me. You can hear it in a way that you can't hear it when you're looking at the news, when you're looking at your computer screen, when you're flicking through your phone. The algorithm is there to develop fear. And I think, hey, this is your opportunity to walk away from some of that, maybe. Yeah,
that's good. And And by walking away from that, it would be invest, especially as a Christian, in the communal life of the church and that process of how the lament happens and how the anger is dealt with or directed, or how the comforting or the conversation or listening to the teenagers in your midst who are old enough to wonder, will I get drafted or would a missile hit my town? Like being present with all of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that is the call of the church, is to do that together, not to be alone on screens or out in nature, alone processing it all just that way.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
That's a pretty good podcast, I think.
I hope so.
I hope so too.
Thanks for tuning in.
Yeah.
As we said, this was the meandering breakfast conversation of two pastors. That's just what we talked about. There you go.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us. Thanks for sitting in. If you have follow-up questions to that, you can always send them to faithoverbreakfast@gmail.com, of course, or any other questions you may have. And we may or may not answer them well, but we'll give it a shot.
Yeah.
And we'll still send you a book.
We'll send you a book. Question. Yeah. So send us a question, a book for you. Got to give us your address, by the way, and your zip code with that address so we can send it to you.
That's right. Reviews and shares of the podcast are huge. I can't say enough. If you enjoy this, if this is a helpful discussion to you, give it a review and share it.
I'll tell you.
Somehow. That helps.
If you give us a review, we'll send you a book.
Oh, well, look at that. You're going to have to keep track of that, Eric.
I will keep track of it. Look.
I not that I'm not on my phone, but I am not tracking this podcast as well as you do.
Well, I'm the one that has to post it, so I see the stats.
You see it. Yeah.
But anyway, regardless of that, I think we know you're listening, and it's not that hard to just say, Andy is great. We love how he does his podcast. Forget Eric. Whatever. 2 stars for Eric, 5 stars for Andy.
The demographics say it's quite the opposite.
But anyway, it doesn't really matter. What I'm trying to say is, please, we know you're out there. Give us a review. It helps us a lot. It gets this podcast out there. So if you think other people should listen to it, then you should review it.
That's right. All right. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. You've been listening to Faith Over Breakfast with Pastor Eric Siepen and Pastor Andy Littleton. Please share us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Thank you.